Darkcast Network. Indie pods with a dark side.
Devil is on his way. Devil is on his way, motherfucker. The devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way. Fall to your knees. Devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way.
Mountain Murders is an Appalachian true crime podcast. Some content may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
We say fuck a lot. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to Mountain Murders. I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
Hey, Dylan. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Is that the proper grammar?
Yes.
Yeah. I heard somebody say that just now in a video, so I thought that maybe is the way you're supposed to say it.
Yes, King. Yes.
How are you, Heather?
You know, I'm hanging in there.
Okay.
Hanging out, hanging tough. Like I'm a new kid on the block. I'm good.
Well, that's great to hear, honestly.
Before we get started, Dylan, you know, I wasn't going to say anything, but I'm going to say something because you know me. I have to say something.
We knew you were going to say something.
Of course. We got a nasty gram yesterday.
A scathing email.
Someone did not like the fact that we questioned the verdict in the Danny Masterson case and thinks that we're like a rapist apologists. Yeah. Which is very incorrect. I mean, if they listen to the podcast at all, they know how we feel about this type of thing. And all I have to say about it is if you're having a bad day, don't pull over your car to send me a nasty email to try to ruin my day because it's not going to work. You can't ruin my day, first of all. And secondly, you need help. And if you're that invested in a celebrity trial, then, I mean, I think that says more about you than me. And also, I don't feel like we said anything out of pocket, Dylan. Here's the thing. You can support victims of sexual assault, and we have both admitted on the show we've both been victimized, right? And we, of course, always take the side of victims. But I will say this. We live in a country where the Constitution rules. And our founding fathers made it very, very clear that they wanted our justice system set up so that you are innocent until proven guilty. They require a certain amount of evidence to prosecute, to convict people in this country. It's not just pointing fingers and you're guilty. So everyone has the right to a fair trial. And you can support victims, but also the justice system is not always going to have the outcome that victims want. And for good reason. I mean, you have to have a certain amount of evidence to prosecute people, right? Yeah. Otherwise, we're living in a tyrannical country.
Yeah, if I'm to remember correctly, the burden of proof is on the prosecution. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, you know, all we were doing was questioning how vastly different trial one. It was a mistrial. You know, 10 of the 12 jurors wanted to find him not guilty. They didn't believe the evidence. Then we have this trial 2 that is completely different. A lot of new evidence has come to light. It's circumstantial evidence. There's no physical evidence to connect Masterson to these accounts, these claims. And all I'm saying is if I was in a jury, listening to this stuff, I would have a hard time being like, well, beyond a reasonable doubt, this man is guilty. Yeah. But that does not mean that I'm discounting victims or that I don't believe the victims. I'm merely pointing out there's this information, these theories are floating, this is what people in the media are saying. That doesn't necessarily say that I'm agreeing that Masterson's innocent or that, oh, poor guy. You know why? Because I don't care. He's a rich fucker living his best life out in Hollywood, earning all this money, doing whatever the fuck he wants. You think he gives a shit about me or you? No. So why do I care about him? I don't.
Well, no, and you can discuss the stark contrast between two trials or have a conversation about procedure and court without backing either victims or the defendant or the perpetrator, alleged perpetrator.
Well, we went from no one believes victims and they're all making it up to this pendulum has swung that you dare not question anything, even if it's inconsistent. People are getting lawsuit money out of it. I mean, you're not allowed to point out facts that discredit a victim or bring question into the minds of others about what is this person telling the truth.
Well, now we've moved on to
now you're just automatically guilty.
Yeah. And
if you even question it, then you're making excuses for this perpetrator and like you're a piece of shit.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but you're not going to come at me with that kind of bullshit and not expect to get a response.
Come at me, bro. No, I mean, look, I think anyone that listens with any regularity knows exactly what me and Heather both think molesters and rapists should get, which is a hot lead between the eyes.
If you're so offended by what we have to say, then my best advice to you is just turn off the podcast. There is a lot of bland, monotone, factual,
very safe.
We will because we're all we care about is making money, so we'll never offend anybody, and we'll backpedal and we'll issue apologies. Well, I mean, if you're looking for an Ashton Kutcher, Mila Kunis here,
oh my God.
I'm not going to apologize because I'm someone who I stand by what I say. And just because you don't like it, that doesn't make me want to kiss your ass. I don't lick boots. I don't lick any boots. I'm not going to lick your boots. I'm going to lick their boots. I am who I am. You are who you are, Dylan. And at the end of the day, it's our podcast, so we say what we want to say.
I ain't no bootlicker, you son bitches. No, I was going to say, since we are talking about this, did you see their apology video?
That is the most spineless shit ever.
Look, if you're going to...
I totally lost respect for them.
Dude, look.
It's so spineless.
You can literally, when people make certain statements nowadays, and I'm not going to go into what they are because people know what they are, basically. When they make certain statements or comments nowadays, you can literally set a clock, a timer, for some groveling ass apology video that we saw Ashton and Mila do. And it just makes me want to fucking puke. Honestly. Look, if you ain't got the guts, you shouldn't have wrote the character letters for him at the request of his family or whatever. That's y'all's business. Y'all, known each other for years and years. You shouldn't have done it if you were going to come out. I mean, how is describing the person you knew and the good qualities that you see and think they believe them to have, how is that like? I don't know. I mean, I don't want to get caught up in their bullshit, but it's just I just don't get any.
Well, at the end of the day, I look at it like this, Dylan. You've got a best friend. He's like your brother.
Yes.
You have best friends, they're like your brothers, right? And if someone came to you and said they did A, B, C, D, they're a horrible, nasty, awful person. And that's the furthest thing you've ever witnessed out of them. You would have reservations about that, right?
You might not believe it. Even if it's true, it would be hard for you to believe. Let's just say it like that,
well,
right?
Exactly. I would be in the same boat. And I think people fail to remember that. It's so easy to watch these trials on TV and you're so invested and it's like, oh, it's like a soap opera. But at the end of the day, like, you don't know these people. And why do you care so much? I mean, really, because it doesn't have anything to do with you.
And there you go.
And if you're going to, and you can't have any kind of discussion without it being super heated, super emotional, you either on this side or that side, there's no room for in between. There's no room to question it. I mean, I just don't know where we go from here with this everybody at each other's throats constantly.
I mean, what's the point of having a conversation?
But all I have to say is if you're going to send me some nasty email, then you're probably going to get one back that tells you to go get some help. Because I'm not your whipping boy, and I'm not here to like take your verbal abuse because you're having a bad day. And when you decide to pull over your car, I mean, one, like, sis, maybe you shouldn't be driving if you that mad, right?
Why you big mad?
Why you so mad?
Man, honestly, listen.
Like, really, two people who have a podcast and they have an opinion or don't even really have an opinion. They're just sharing other people's opinions, just bringing to light, like, what's been said. And you have such a reaction to that. Maybe you need to learn to like deal with your emotions in a healthy way is all I'm saying.
If you want cookie cutter, safe, homogenized, vanilla, there's literally hundreds of podcasts out there like that.
Oh,
now,
I can name a couple that focus on Southern crime, and you'll hear a commercial every couple of minutes.
Yeah.
And it's so
it's the same podcast.
monotone that it will put you to sleep. Feel free.
It's the same
They're
podcast.
They're there to make lots of money, and that's why they keep it safe. So go find your safe space.
It's the same podcast over and over, just by different people. I mean, yeah, and that's fine. If you like that, that's fine.
I just can't imagine getting so pissed off that you feel like you need to like cuss people out that you don't even know that are bringing you entertainment every week, that you're getting more out of them than they're getting out of you. Right?
Yeah, enough about that piece of big mad.
Big mad.
Big
mad. Anyway, all I'm saying is you send me a nasty email. Don't be surprised if you get one in return. All right, Dylan, we have a case today that is very fascinating, and I'm surprised it hasn't garnered more attention over the years because it's such a scary situation to be in.
Even with my goldfish memory that I'm famous for, this case has always stuck with me when I first heard of it. And it is fascinating, but I mean, it's so sad.
It is so sad.
And I don't know, monstrous. So yeah, when you said we were going to do this case, I was looking forward to discussing it. So yeah, I'm ready.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is a case that deserves more attention, and is also just very scary because we've all been on vacation, and this kind of thing could really happen to anybody. Are you ready, Dylan?
It's true. It really literally could happen to anyone.
Wilshire, Ohio. Ever heard of it?
No.
Well, that's because it's an incredibly small village located in Van Wert County. It lies along the border of Ohio and Indiana, with the St. Mary's River flowing along the eastern edge of the community. Most residents live below the poverty line. It is a place filled with working class folks, so probably just salt of the earth, good old like country people.
Did you say most residents live below the
They
poverty
do.
line?
There's
Wow.
a large majority of people in the area live below the poverty line. It's a place filled with working class residents. The population only about 400. They have around 192 households.
Good night. Now that is just literally a tiny, tiny little community.
Very small. It's a close-knit community where everybody knows everybody and neighbors keep an eye out for each other. So like an ideal little small place to live, right?
Yeah. Some people thrive in environments like this. It's everyone knows everyone, and they have a feeling of community, a feeling of safety. When literally know the name or know of someone's family, every person you see during the day.
Exactly. So Joan and Hal Rogers lived a hard but peaceful life on their 300-acre dairy farm. Life wasn't easy for the high school sweethearts, especially when Jo got pregnant as a teenager with their daughter, Michelle. Jo's parents were unhappy about the situation. And let's be honest, most parents are probably not going to be thrilled when their teenage daughter comes home and says, oh yeah, by the way, I'm pregnant.
Well, certainly there's different types of reactions to this, but I think they're all similar. It's just the severity of the reaction. But no one is like glad that their teenage son or daughter, let them know that they're going to have a baby, because it's tough.
It's a hard row to hoe, as they say, right? Instead of a traditional wedding, the couple quietly married with no family or friends in attendance. In 1971, the couple married and spent a few days in Fort Wayne, Indiana, honeymooning at the Hospitality Inn Motel.
Wow.
The daily grind of farm life was center stage for the Rogers. Neither Hal nor Joan came from money, and the couple knew the only way to carve out a piece of the American dream was through hard work and determination.
And milking cows.
In farming, there are no breaks from chores. The whole family is needed to make things run smoothly, including their children. Michelle was born in 1972, and her sister Christy was born in 1974. Jo also worked night shift at Peyton's Northern, a distribution center for health and beauty products, where she drove a forklift and worked the assembly line. Jo was, quote, burning the candle at both ends. I'm sure that's a phrase you've heard before, Dylan.
I've done that before.
You absolutely have. It is said that Jo worked at the factory to maintain health insurance benefits for her family. Between her night job, farming, and being a full-time mom, she hardly slept. Overworked and exhausted, Jo, who had been very beautiful and carefree in her younger days, folks said she kind of aged beyond her years because she was so tired.
Well, I got to say, I'm sure people know about it, but they sometimes forget how important sleep is. Sleep is every bit as important as food, water, oxygen to the body. I mean, it really is. I think you can go longer without food and water than you can without sleep. Like, you can literally die if you don't sleep for days and days and days on end.
She had dark circles under the eyes, and her slim build dwindled until she was gaunt and appeared to be sickly, and people were worried about her.
Well, that sounds like a rather extreme situation there.
Jo was upbeat, outgoing, and she was kind of known to be like that one in the partnership. Hal was quieter, more reserved. Despite the difficult laboring required to run the farm, plus those extra hours that Jo was working outside the home, she always tried to remain positive and keep the family motivated. She was a cheerleader of sorts, always a sunny person who looked forward to one day reaping the benefits of all this hard work. Jo was a natural at making friends, whereas Hal was more introverted. Yet Jo was able to bring out the best in her husband, often dragging him to dance when her favorite country song came on. And together they were complementary, and by all accounts, they had a very tender, caring marriage. They was besties, Dylan.
A tender carrot marriage? Nice.
That is not what I said, but
I
I'm
know it's
glad
not.
that that's what you heard. Yet Jo's own family was surprised at how well she did on the farm. Growing up, she had always had her dad, brother, and uncle to do the heavy lifting, so to speak, and she had not been much of a farmer. Her family recalled how she once drove a riding mower smack into a tree. Quote, she had known enough about it to stay away, is what her brother said.
So she realized maybe it's just not her thing.
Well, this is growing up.
Right.
Yeah. Yet with her husband, she jumped in feet first. The pair had a goal, and sacrificing the present in order to have a better future was something that they lived by. Poverty was temporary, especially if Jo had any say in it. They scraped by, and sometimes money was tight, yet they managed. They hadn't minded being young parents, even when many of their peers were swept up in the counterculture of the late 60s and early 70s. They considered by the time their girls were grown, they'd be in their 40s, primed for enjoying life and hopefully getting some grandchildren too. And you're kind of like in that situation, Dylan. You had kids not super young, but fairly young.
Well, fairly young.
And so by this age, you've got grown kids, you're in your 40s, you're ready to party.
I would never party. That sounds totally irresponsible.
That sounds like everything Dylan does. Yes.
That's not true. That's not true.
Jo did her best to keep trucking for her family. Each morning, after helping Hal milk the cows and getting the girls to school, Jo and Hal would go into town for breakfast. The two ate dinner out when they could, just to get a break from the animals and the farm machinery, which dominated their lives. Managing 200 acres was very hard work.
Now,
It was actually closer to 3, but...
I think farming is one of the toughest professions of all, because especially when you're dealing with the livestock and animals, those chores just simply cannot wait. You can't be like, I don't want to do it right now, I'll do it later. Like dairy cows, for instance, they have to be milked on time so many times a day. There's just no way around it. And so that's just a type of work where you just, even if you're dead tired, don't want to do it, it still gets done. It has to be done. There's just no time to wait.
Living next door on the family farm was Hal's brother, John. Described as a bit of an oddball, John was often seen wearing military fatigues, like the battle dress uniform.
Yeah, okay. I mean, was he a veteran?
Well, he had been discharged from the Marine Corps in 1980. He and brother Hal pulled their money to buy some dairy cows. He would tell stories about the Army, even though he had been in the Marine Corps, which is weird, being an undercover CIA operative, and having ties to the Secret Service.
Yeah, that is a bit odd, I must say.
And dude, I just, on a side note, I met this guy one time. Okay. He came to a roller derby practice with the idea that he wanted to be a volunteer referee. And anybody that's willing to volunteer, we will scoop you right up. Okay. But this guy was very delusional about how he had been part of the Delta Force and had done all these secret ops, had CIA connections or whatever, and loved to pull out his flip phone. Which this is in the day and age of smartphones. But he'd pull out his flip phone and he'd pull up a picture, and it was obviously like him decked out in like hunting gear, like Realtree.
Yeah.
Trying to convince me that that was him on a secret mission.
Oh yeah, that's him in his uniform.
But it was really a picture of him in like his Walmart Realtree that he had taken like in the woods, like a selfie. But it was on a mission.
Did you guys use him as a volunteer referee?
Well, no, because he ended up being like creepy and weirding everybody out.
No,
yeah,
big surprise.
Okay, so long story short, but my boyfriend and I at the time would always laugh about Delta Force guy.
Well, yeah. I mean, if someone's showing you a picture and they're obviously in a hunting or recreational gear of some sorts and trying to convince you that they're on some secret Delta or Army Ranger mission, then I mean, come on, that's pretty damn funny.
Yeah. Because every time I'd run an errand, I'd be like, I'm sorry, I have a Delta Force mission. I have to go.
Yeah.
I can't talk about it.
The president's called me up. I got to go.
Yeah, it became like a running joke. But yeah, he was super creepy and weird. And he was quite older and very overweight. And there was no way he was in the military with that body type. I'm just saying. But anywho.
Let alone the elite of the elites.
But not Delta Force.
Right.
Right. Yeah. In March of 1988, John was accused of sexual assault against his girlfriend. The pair had recently broken up, but she continued to stay in the trailer with John until she found someplace else to live. She reported that when she returned to the trailer one evening, she was ambushed by a man wearing a mask who handcuffed her and put a blindfold over her eyes. It wasn't difficult for her to recognize from his voice that it was her former boyfriend, John.
How do you think that's going to work? Like, just because you sneak up on somebody and blindfold them, they're going to know your voice, dude. You need at least a voice box to change your voice. Be like, I am not Dylan.
People have said John is an oddball, but people have not described him as being incredibly intelligent.
Well, I could fuck you up because I can do some voices. I'll be like, hey, you got some of them mustard biscuits?
See, I would know that was you.
I'll be like, it ain't got no gas. Oh, God, I got to work on my car. It fell off.
Well, he threatened her with a knife to keep her from crying out for help. And then he sexually assaulted her. John was arrested for this crime. And when the sheriff's department conducted a search of Joan Rogers' trailer, they discovered a briefcase which contained the incriminating tape of this assault.
So he taped the sexual assault.
Videotaped it.
Well, I mean... Well, good. I mean, the only reason that's good is because there's some really, fairly significant definitive proof of the crime. So what a dumbass.
However, no one suspected what else investigators would find. And it is appalling, Dylan.
Oh my gosh.
There were also photographs of Michelle Rogers, John's niece, who appeared to be blindfolded and naked. Scared, Michelle reluctantly admitted that her Uncle John had been abusing her since she was about 15 years old.
What the hell?
Joe and Hal were devastated and felt blindsided. They knew something had been amiss with Michelle, but they chalked it up to typical surly teenage behavior. They had no idea she was being sexually abused by her uncle. Michelle had been sacrificing herself to keep her little sister Christy safe. She said the abuse occurred on weekends when her parents were out of town conducting farm business.
So it's over and over continued abuse.
Yes.
Which is just so horrible.
For some years.
Like even when she hears her parents discussing, hey, we got to go out of town next weekend, she probably the pit of her stomach would, clench up. That is so disgusting.
Her uncle had threatened her life. But also, she was trying to protect her little sister. So for 2 years, Michelle endured abuse, but she was able to prevent Christy from being alone with her uncle during this time.
What a damn Sophie's choice, if you will. You know, if I just take the abuse, then maybe he'll leave my little sister alone, and I can try to watch out for her.
And it's really sad because you hear stories like that in a lot of families where one child, usually an older sibling, will do whatever is required to try to keep their younger siblings safe.
And sometimes when they
and it's such a noble, pure act to love your sibling and want to protect them like that. But it's also just so heartbreaking that young people, that they experience this kind of thing and that they feel like they have to do this to protect someone they love.
Yeah.
I mean...
Yeah, no one should have to make that choice. Jeez. No way.
Well, of course, John denied the allegations and claimed he was being framed. Hal, feeling as though he had failed to protect his child, became deeply depressed. Michelle and John had a very public dislike of one another. He was always picking at the girl, which caused her to react in anger and sometimes even with physical violence. Like she would push him, shove him, smack him.
Well.
John, quote, didn't know how to shut up, according to most who knew him. So he's just a loudmouth,
shitbird,
bully, obnoxious. Michelle was further upset when her dad helped John with the $10,000 bail bond. Now, according to Hal, he had agreed to help before he knew what was really going on. And being a man of his word, didn't back out even though Michelle was a victim too, when he found out his daughter was a victim.
Come on, dude. I mean, I got man of my word. Are you kidding me?
I mean, this is a guy who he very much Hal very much has like integrity and like.
Well, I get that, but I
know it's hard for me to wrap my head around too.
You're going against your integrity once you realize what the whole situation is and realizing that your people's being abused, possibly being abused as well. I mean, damn,
bro, I totally get what you're saying. Trust. John was ordered not to visit his family or the trailer, so he moved to Michigan to stay with his parents until the case was settled. Hal began dissolving the partnership, severing all ties to John professionally and otherwise. Like, he never would speak to his brother again. Revelations such as these can often tear a family apart. Childhood sexual abuse can be horrific, but it's even more sinister when a relative is the abuser. Experts estimate that 1 in 10 children are sexually abused before their 18th birthday. 30% of children are abused by family members. As many as 60% are abused by people the family trusts. About 35% of these victims are 11 years old or younger. I mean, these statistics are disheartening. And to discover someone you love and trust has sexually abused someone else that you love brings up mixed emotions.
I'd kill him.
Anger, rage, heartbreak, sadness. I mean, the list goes on.
I'm telling you, I don't know if you've ever seen that video of that dad who's talking on that payphone as they walk the perpetrator that I think either molested or raped his daughter by him. And he turns around and puts the .38 right behind his ear and pulls the trigger.
Oh, I've seen it.
That guy, not all heroes wear capes, folks. I mean, that's what that piece of shit deserved. And he sacrificed his freedom to make sure he got it.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of parents out there who probably relate to that.
Well, yeah, because we see so time and again that a lot of times abusers do not get the punishment that anywhere near what they deserve. Honestly,
Hal would later say, "quote If I'd known, I'd have killed the son of a bitch to start with." Things came to a head when Irene Rogers denied the accusations against her son John. She sided with him over her granddaughter Michelle, even going as far as telling people around town that her teenage granddaughter was a liar. Hal was livid. He promptly cut ties with his own mother. She even told the Tampa Tribune that Michelle and Joe made everything up.
Okay.
Despite the setback, both girls made the most of farm life. Michelle was the quieter, more introverted sister who was often seen reading on the back of the school bus rather than engaging with her peers. She aspired to be a veterinarian. Christy was outgoing. She loved the cows, often giving them names and treating them as if they were pets. Christy also performed cheerleading routines for the cows. And she had a really close relationship with her dad. They were considered like inseparable. Like Christy and her dad were besties. In light of the tragedy that had happened, Jo was determined to make her daughters feel less burdened. To lift their spirits, Jo planned a special vacation for the girls in Florida.
My God. I've never heard this backstory part of this case. I've just heard the tail end of it. And that makes me so much more sad.
I know, it really does make this story
My
even
God.
more tragic. Sun-drenched Florida sounded like a dream to the teenagers. Sounds like a dream to me right now.
Well, you got
Not gonna lie.
they're living the farm life, you know. Where is it? In
Ohio.
farm life. So, you know, it's mucky, it's dusty, it's, you know, all that.
Flat.
You know, no. And just even think about going to get to kick it on the beach in Florida. I mean, that just sounds like just an incredible time.
It was the family's first real vacation together. Hal wanted to go too, but there were too many chores to be done on the farm. Cows needed milking. Corn crops were, needed to be planted. Hal would stay behind completing the work while his girls went to play, which, in my opinion, is a solid dad move.
Oh yeah, that's just what dads do.
Yeah,
and moms.
I'm thinking,
but
about,
that's
I'm
what
thinking
parents.
of all the times that I've gone with kids camping, or to the beach, or on some adventure, while you had to do work and you couldn't go.
Had to do work.
You had to work. You couldn't go.
Gosh. Yeah, but it's okay. I mean, I would rather my family or loved ones be off having a good time, even though I'm stuck, milking cows and planting corn and making the earth submit to my will.
Yeah.
That's what I call farming.
Okay. You're not a farmer.
No, but I do pound holes into the ground, and I do bust rocks, and I lift heavy things. So, I know a little bit about.
Why are you trying to find a second wife?
I know a little bit about making the earth give it up.
Oh, well, I'm
Yeah.
glad you know something about it.
Oh.
Okay, so Florida is a warm magnet for vacationers, as if you didn't know that. People flock to the Sunshine State, filling hotels, dining in restaurants, and pumping millions into the economies from Tampa to Miami. On May 26th of 1989, the three ladies embarked on their road trip to Jacksonville, Florida. Now, this is how my brain works, Dylan. I'm thinking about this mom, her two teenage girls, Memorial Day weekend, 1989. They're going on a road trip. I had to look up what song was popular that week.
What was it?
Because this is how my brain works. And I imagine the girls had their mother listening to Paula Abdul's Forever Your Girl while they headed down I-75 in the blue 1986 Oldsmobile Calais. Is that how you say it?
I'm not familiar.
I think it's Calais. That it was Joe's car. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was the #1 box office draw. And if you were catching a TV show at that time, it was probably Cheers, Perfect Strangers, or Quantum Leap.
Perfect Strangers. And all those, bro. Quantum Leap.
I loved Quantum Leap.
That was
as
the
a young
shit,
person.
bro.
The Rogers ladies arrived the following day after a 1,000-mile journey on May 27th and spent their time perusing the Jacksonville Zoo. I imagine they enjoyed seeing flamingos, stingrays, elephants, and lions. The Jacksonville Zoo is incredibly cool, judging from their website. I did go check it out. And after the zoo, the family headed for Silver Springs. I've been to Silver Springs.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that a beach town?
No, it's super cool. Silver Springs is an artesian spring located in Ocala where visitors can get a tour on glass-bottom boats.
Okay.
So Michelle and Christy were very excited. They broke out the Nikon 1 touch camera that they brought on the trip. They're snapping photos. You got to remember this is before the Instagrams.
Were you transported? Was this very nostalgic for you as you were, doing the story and researching it? Did it take you back in the day, if you will?
It did a little bit, yeah. So they're snapping photos. It was hardly the relaxing trip that Joe desperately needed, but making her daughters happy was the most important thing. The vacation carried on this way for the next 4 days. Sightseeing, driving, checking into different motels each night. Rinse and repeat, Dylan. On Monday, the 29th, Joe wrote a postcard to her husband, telling him about how the girls were dragging her everywhere. After a few days in Orlando, spending time at MGM Studios and SeaWorld, the girls sent postcards to their friends. They snapped more photos. On Thursday, June 1st, they left Orlando, headed for Tampa, where they planned to go to Busch Gardens, another theme park. It is unclear if they actually visited Busch Gardens. Michelle's boyfriend, Jeff Feesby, had received a call from the Tampa motel room. In the background, Christy and Joe were making like happy noises. He could hear that they sounded like they were having a great time. So, everything seemed fine. Jeff had expected them to leave Florida on Saturday morning, and they told him they were going to drive straight through. If they stopped, it would be Sunday evening at the latest. Jeff had phoned Hal on Sunday night when he hadn't heard from Michelle. Hal was already growing uneasy. He said, quote, "I wanted them home. I missed them."
Well, yeah, I mean, that sounded like a fairly, a bit of an extended trip. They'd done all the things. And you know how it is. Once you go away, even if you're at home or even if you need a break from the family and want some quiet time, very quickly, you just miss your family. You know?
I know. Like the first, after the first 6 hours, you're texting me like, "I miss you guys. When are you coming back?
Yeah.
You sure you don't want to come back a day early?"
Yeah. Well, I mean, as much as you think that, you might want quiet, and everybody's different. Some people may be fine like that, but I very quickly get bored, and I just need my wife in my life.
Yeah, I know. When it's quiet and you're gone or the kids are gone away on a trip or spending the night or a couple days at a friend's house, you do kind of get a little lonely.
Lonely.
So lonely.
I'm so lonely.
Someone's going to send us an email upset.
I have nobody
How dare
to
you.
call my own.
How dare you make fun of Kim Jong-un? Or was it Kim Jong-il on the Team America? I don't know.
I didn't know that's what we were doing.
Lonely.
Oh, really? You had me in on that? Oh, my God, Heather.
Yes.
That's not okay.
Well, don't you remember in Team America?
Well, I do
he's
now,
okay.
and I just thought we were doing a funny voice. I didn't know we were
Moving along.
slapping North Korea in the face.
Fuck North Korea. When they arrived in Tampa, Joe spent some time driving around searching for the Days Inn at Rocky Point. She also examined the map for Clearwater Beach, as she had grabbed a brochure advertising, how lovely it was. And you got to remember, Joe wants to rest and relax a little bit on this trip. So she's looking forward to maybe at least one day at the beach.
Yeah, 1 or 2 days of just not running all over the place and doing all the things. Because I got to say, even though it may be fun, going to things like SeaWorld, Busch Gardens, anything like that, it's tiring.
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting.
It's hot.
It's hot.
There's crowds.
There's so much asphalt.
Stuff's sticky.
It's 25,000 and like 10 and like $100 waters. Yeah. I mean, oh my gosh.
Of course, this was the 80s, but still.
Yeah, it was a little bit better, but that's always been the business model of places like that.
As Joe sat in the car studying the map, a man approached the car. He was white, in his mid to late 30s, with sandy blonde hair and a mustache. The stranger offered help if they were lost. He noticed their Ohio plates. So, assuming they were tourists, the man asked if they needed directions and shared that he was originally from Ohio. On the Clearwater Beach brochure, the man wrote down directions to the motel. Then he extended a wonderful invitation. Would they like to come out on his boat that evening for a sunset cruise? I will take you out and we can watch the sunset from the water. I've got a boat. Doesn't that sound awesome, Dylan?
Well, it sounds very nice. I mean, it's something I would like to experience.
So he seemed friendly and helpful. The girls also liked the idea. He told Joe how to get to the boat launch. Once there, look out for a blue and white boat, he added. They thanked him and went on their way. They checked into the Days Inn around 12:30 p.m. Joe wrote down the directions he had given them on, to the boat launch, on that same brochure. And she also wrote down a description of the boat on the motel stationery. So she's got a couple handwritten notes, the brochure, the motel stationery, with this information. Now, I'm not sure how they spent the afternoon. Perhaps relaxing at the beach after a busy week of sightseeing. I don't know. But they did eat dinner at the restaurant attached to the motel that evening, where they were spotted by another patron, a businessman from Texas, who happened to be in Tampa for a conference. He ate his meal alone. Michelle said hello to him as they passed his table on their way out, which was around 7:30 p.m. Around sunset, they left the motel. A final photo was taken with their camera from the balcony, showing a beautiful, bay scene with the sun starting to set. This is the last time the Rogers women were seen alive. The boat launch was only 1 mile from the motel. On June 4th of 1989, passengers aboard a sailboat returning to Tampa made an unusual but gruesome discovery. They promptly notified the Coast Guard to report a body was seen floating in the bay.
I just don't know how I would react in real life if I was present when I found a body. Even if I'm jogging, hunting, taking my kid to fish, all the, cliche versions, or, passenger in a boat and seeing a human remains floating in the water. Is that the case here?
The rescue boat arrived to find a partially clothed female with her hands and feet bound by yellow nylon cord. She also had a rope around her neck. The decedent was submerged by a heavy object. A 30-pound concrete block had been tied to the rope around her neck. It almost sounds as if she was hogtied.
Right.
Like the hands and feet, and then you know how sometimes the neck gets tied into that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's not exactly how it was described, but that's almost what I pictured.
I don't know if it's the helplessness of the position or what, but being hogtied, it seems so very scary to me.
Yes, absolutely.
Anytime I see someone hogtied, even if they're acting a damn fool and the cops have to do it to, throw them in the back of the car or whatever, it disturbs me to see a human being in that position.
It's so unnatural.
It's so unnatural.
It's a very
and you're
unnatural
yes. That's it. And you're so very helpless. There's just not a chance to do anything.
Again, it's very unnatural for a human being to be in that position because you really are totally helpless. Rescuers were able to cut the rope and lift the body onto the boat. So they were able to cut this concrete block, right? And it fell. She was placed in a body bag immediately. As the rescue crew began making their way back to the shore, another call came in. A second body had been discovered in the water, 2 miles north of the first, at the St. Petersburg Pier. Then, as the rescue crew were making their way to recover the second body, another call came in. A third body had been found not far from the second. Like the first body, the second and third were also weighed down with 30-pound concrete blocks attached to ropes tied around their necks. Each victim was floating face down, their ankles bound together, and their hands tied behind their backs with yellow rope. Their mouths were taped with duct tape. The bodies were nude from the waist down. All 3 victims were white, females, and appeared to be fairly young.
I bet the rescuers there, the authorities, whoever's come out to collect the first body that's been discovered, are probably at this point what the hell's going on?
This is honestly probably one of the worst days they ever had on the job.
Not that.
I mean, this is very, very troubling.
Yeah, not that one body is very disturbing, but then a second one, and before you can even process that, and then how odd that is, a third one.
I know.
All 3 of them obviously connected because of state of the remains and the restraints on them. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I think we often ignore the emergency responders who happen upon these victims.
Or have to recover all the remains and everything like that.
What they see, what they witness, and what they experience is very sad.
Well, dude, could you imagine the authorities or anyone who went under John Wayne Gacy's house?
No.
I mean, just every time you think you've got one, you're finding another. I mean, poor people. That's why I have such high burnout, rates in all those professions.
Although water had washed away any physical evidence, such as DNA, law enforcement officials were starting at square one. At this point, the women's identities were unknown. They were taken to a medical examiner's office in St. Petersburg. The medical examiner determined the women had likely been in the water between 3 to 5 days. Tampa police surmised the women had been sexually assaulted given their states of undress. Due to the warm water temperatures in the bay, the bodies likely decomposed at a faster rate than if they'd been in cooler water. During the decomposition, gases had caused the women to rise despite having been weighted down. With no visible wounds on the victims, it was theorized that the women had been tied to concrete blocks and thrown into the water while alive. Dylan.
Oh my God. That's just monstrous. I just don't understand how you could do that to an animal, let alone another human being.
Autopsies later confirmed the women had died of asphyxiation. Left with only a few clothing items and jewelry, investigators worked tirelessly to identify the victims. Back in Ohio, Hal phoned his in-laws asking if they'd heard from Joe and the girls. They had not. He was growing irritated that his family had not contacted anyone. No news is good news, he figured. Even Joe's brother Jim and his wife Colleen were beginning to worry. Joe would certainly call if they ran into problems, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right.
Right.
You know, like she would be in contact. I mean, even if nothing was wrong.
Well, they were getting they were getting updates during the entire trip. Hey, we just did this. It sounds like almost daily, you know?
A week after the women's discovery, a maid at the Days Inn reported how 3 women had left behind all of their personal items in room 251 and had not returned to claim the luggage. Detectives arrived, scouring the room for fingerprints and any helpful information. They were able to match the fingerprints of the victims in the water to those in the room. From registration records, law enforcement learned the women's identities, and they contacted the Van Wert County Sheriff's Office in Ohio. Tampa police requested dental records, which they used to identify the women. Hal Rogers then learned the soul-crushing news that his family had been murdered.
See, this is huge for the investigation. Now, you found the room, which that was good work on the maid's part, because that's obviously out of the ordinary for people to leave all their stuff. One person would be weird, but 3 people certainly very odd. And now they have identified them, and they have a starting point, you know, to try to build a timeline and, you know, look for any witnesses that may have seen these ladies around.
Officers were able to locate the blue Calais. Again, I don't know if I'm saying that right. I can't imagine it's called a callus.
Is it C-A-L-A? What is it?
C-A-L-A-I-S.
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm going to have to look that one up later.
Maybe the car is called a callus, but
maybe
I'm thinking it's Calais.
It's a Calais.
Maybe Calais. Maybe, I don't know.
Maybe
I looked the car up, and it's like a very square-bodied, very 80s type of vehicle.
Maybe it's French.
And it looks familiar, but then again, I don't know if I've ever actually known anybody who owned one of these. Hence, I don't know how to pronounce it.
I honestly don't think I've ever seen this vehicle or known that I've seen it.
Well, officers were able to locate the blue car parked near a boat ramp by Courtney Campbell Parkway. Inside the vehicle, notes were written on the map detailing directions from the motel to the boat ramp with a description of a boat.
Wow.
It was clear the Rogers family had made plans to meet someone who owned a blue and white boat. A special task force was formed to resolve the case. When Tampa investigators learned of the terrible situation back home involving Michelle and her uncle Joan Rogers, law enforcement wanted to question him. They speculated whether he had hired a hitman from prison to carry out an execution on the family. However, the task force was hindered by a lack of physical evidence and little information to go on. Investigators asked researchers at the University of South Florida to analyze the currents for that time period. Their findings indicated that the victims entered in the middle of the bay, not far from a bridge or shoreline, which showed that a boat had to be involved. So they were entered into the water, you know, out in the water.
Not anywhere near
It wasn't
shore.
like they were on the shore.
Which makes sense, because if you were anywhere near the shore, even past the breakers, you know, the waves, you're likely going to get pushed directly back to shore. you wouldn't be, floating around the bay.
Well, and this is smart too because it explains, like, depending on the times and the currents, how the tide might have pulled the two bodies, in one direction and another,
Right.
So that would make sense. Now, using credit card receipts, photos, brochures, and other paper trails, investigators were able to retrace the women's steps. They were able to interview staff who had spoken with the victims in the days leading up to their deaths. It wasn't long before the media got word of the triple homicide in the Bay. The highly publicized case focused on the blue and white boat, which had been used to lure the women to their deaths. As with any homicide investigation, law enforcement needed to start close to home. The women were due back on June 3rd, yet Hal Rogers had waited 3 days to report his wife and daughters missing. Investigators needed a complete picture of the family dynamic before ruling him out as a suspect. Investigators were suspicious of Hal, mostly due to his cold exterior. He was quiet, reacted with little emotion, and masked his grief well. The way in which he reacted with detectives didn't reflect what was going on inside the man. He was in turmoil. And I think we've probably all known these people, this very stoic, like strong, silent type.
Right.
Right? But that doesn't mean that they're not overwhelmed by the shocking news that they've lost a loved one.
No, some people are not comfortable showing strong emotions, even not just sad or mad, but just happy too. Some people aren't comfortable showing their emotions to others.
Well, in his possession, Hal had $7,000 cash, which he'd taken from the bank in the days following his family's disappearance. This made law enforcement question, was he planning to run? Hal explained that he had taken the money out in order to travel to Florida and search for his family, and he still had the money on him. Like, he was ready to load up and go. Hal was quickly ruled out as a suspect due to his habit of eating breakfast at local restaurants while his family was away. There were multiple witnesses who had seen him daily that week as he had eaten meals. It would have been impossible for him to be in Florida the night they were killed, but back in Wilshire for breakfast. Hal continued running the farm with the help of friends, despite the ongoing tragedy unfolding in Florida. People in Wilshire tried their best to remember the good times. I mean, these were people who'd held the girls in their arms as infants and had watched Joe work hard every day to care for her family. So the entire community was devastated.
Well,
this is a small, you have 192 households.
Well, yeah, I mean, this would stand out even in a larger area, a bigger city. A whole family wiped out, basically, except for Hal. And that goes back to what I said earlier, the thing about farms. Even in this moment of tragedy, the last thing he probably could think of or even cares about is the farm. I mean, that's got to be back burner, but the chores have to be done. The animals have to be tended to. And it's kind of heartwarming to see that the community knows this because, it's probably a farming community.
It is, and they really came together
and
to
they know that
support
they
him.
have to, hey, let's try to, help him do this stuff because he has, my God, his heart's been broken, ripped out of his chest.
Absolutely. And these people are all heartbroken. I mean, again, they've held these little girls in their arms when they were babies. They've watched them grow up. They went to church with these kids. They were in school. They played sports with their children. I mean, it's really so sad when you think about it.
See, this is what community means to me, a sense of community. And you made a good point the other day when we were traveling ourselves, that it's like they try to give a false sense of community nowadays. We were actually talking about mixed use developments and how, they have the apartments above all the stores and all this stuff. And it's like you said, they're trying to bring back a sense of community because that's been hollowed out. But it's fake. It's not real. People will still live next door and never ever speak to their neighbors or get to know each other in the least bit. But I would rather live in a place like this, honestly, than a place where no one knows each other and would literally step over you on the sidewalk if you needed help. I'd rather be in a small community like this where everyone knows, loves, and cares about their neighbors.
Well, and I think, we talk about gentrification a lot on this show, and I know some people are like probably tired of hearing it, but I think goes hand in hand with when we're like complaining about people moving in here that aren't from the area and they're gentrifying and they're driving out locals, is that we had a sense of community here, you know, and especially even a generation ago. Like my dad grew up with, you know, everybody and knows everybody in the county, and they all went to high school together.
Right.
And everybody got their hair cut at my papa's barber shop. And it's like, you know, people that would, even if they don't know you, they know your granddaddy.
They know of
They
you.
know your mama, and they're willing to do whatever they can to help you.
Right.
And we're losing that, you know, and I think that's also what's really hard for a lot of people, is that we are losing out that sense of community that we grew up with.
No, and they literally build these areas to look like little town, quaint, cozy town squares, but there's none of the heart or soul there.
Well, no.
It's fake.
So-
It's a facade.
Okay.
It's a
As
facade.
months passed, the case grew even colder, and members of the task force were eventually shifted to focus on other cases. Yet the lead detective, Jim Capel, remained laser focused on solving this triple homicide. In October, a colleague suggested that Capel check out the monthly Unsolved Cases Bulletin. There was a sexual assault near Madeira Beach, which might be of interest. On May 15th of 1989, 2 weeks before the Rogers murders, a Canadian woman named Judy Blair had been assaulted. The 24-year-old was on a boat owned by a man she had met while on vacation. The boat was described as being blue and white, just like the one in the Rogers case. Now, this could be the break Capel needed to crack the case. He traveled to Canada to meet with Blair. During their interview, Blair told Capel how she and a friend had met a man in his 30s who called himself Dave Posner. They were in a 7-Eleven parking lot when the polite man offered to take them for a boat ride.
Man, now as an investigator, your ears really got to perk up when you hear about this case, because here you have a sexual assault, you have a similar description of the boat, and of the boat you think's involved in the deaths of these 3 women. And yeah, I mean, you can see how strongly he believed in it, because he, you know, flew to Canada to talk in person to person with the witness.
Blair described the first outing as totally normal. She had a good time. Dave invited them for a second boat ride. Blair agreed to go, but her friend declined. Out on the water, it was like totally reminiscent of the first time, right? It's a fun cruise. Everything's cool. Then suddenly, Blair described a change in Dave's behavior. He began acting in a peculiar way. Then he started demanding sex and ultimately raped Judy Blair. He then apologized, ordered the woman to dress, and swim to shore. She said he then threw up over the side of the boat several times before resuming conversation as if nothing had ever happened. Judy was stunned. Once they were close to shore, she did jump in as fast as she could to swim away from him. Judy also offered up details that the man claimed he owned an aluminum company and lived in Bradenton, Florida. But there was no Dave Posner, no aluminum company, and no one by that name who lived in Bradenton.
Wait a second, is he lying?
Sounds like him. Capel was convinced that this was their killer. Blair helped a sketch artist create a composite sketch of the attacker. Capel released the drawing to local media in Tampa. After this image was released, hundreds of tips poured in, but little offered insight into the man's identity. A year after the horrific triple homicide, a new sergeant named Glenn Moore asked that the case be reviewed once more. He thought fresh eyes and maybe retesting some of the small pieces of evidence might bring closure to the crime. Moore paid extra attention to the brochure found in Joe's car that contained directions to the motel. Now, during this time, an unknown set of fingerprints were found on this brochure. That's when Moore reached out to the FBI for help. The behavioral science unit created a profile of the killer. He was likely a serial murderer in his 30s or 40s who was intelligent, charming, and friendly, easily able to disarm victims. He was a meticulous planner and reveled in the torment and suffering of the victims. The FBI deduced he had likely killed before the triple homicide and was familiar with Tampa Bay, suggesting that he was a local resident.
Well, that makes sense.
In spring of 1992, almost 3 years later, investigators theorized the person who'd wrote down the directions on the brochure was likely the killer. The handwriting didn't match Jo or her daughters. Police thought the handwriting was unusual. The penmanship had a very strange way of writing the letter Y, and the T's almost seemed to be capitalized, even when they were lowercase, which is unusual.
So some fairly obvious, unique qualities to this handwriting,
Yes.
if you will.
Photos of the brochure were distributed to the media and even placed on billboards around Tampa with hopes someone might recognize the handwriting and call in a tip.
You know anybody that writes like this? Call the police.
It was a long shot, but investigators felt it was their only hope. So 5 billboards went up in the area that said, quote, "Who wrote these directions? You may know who killed the Rogers family.
Wow.
$25,000 reward."
Well, you know, that's thinking outside the box, definitely. But I give kudos to the investigators because, I mean, you're just trying to take what little bit of what little of a lead you have, and make something happen. So I think that was really good work.
A Tampa resident named Joanne Steffi had been following the case closely. She noted the sketch was eerily similar to that of her neighbor, who owned a blue and white boat and lived just a few miles from the boat ramp where Jo's car had been found. The neighbor had always been amicable and even helpful, but Steffi couldn't shake the feelings that there was something not okay about this guy.
He just gave her the heebie-jeebies.
She finally confided in a Hillsborough County Sheriff deputy who happened to be in an accounting class with her. So he promises to relay the information and possibly look into the lead. However, weeks went by and then months. Steffi's suspicions only grew stronger. In 1990, the man had moved away from Dalton Avenue. But Steffi recalled how he had built a porch for another neighbor and one of her friends named Moselle Smith. Stephanie asked Smith for a copy of the contract.
Oh my gosh.
When the two compared the handwriting on the contract with the billboards, they were convinced it was a match.
Oh my gosh, they're like their own little investigators.
Little amateur sleuths here.
Yeah, handwriting experts.
The pair sent handwriting samples to the task force and identified the neighbor as 45-year-old Oba Chandler. After wading through hundreds of tips, investigators finally came calling in July of 1992. So it took them a minute to get back to Steffi.
Yeah, and there's such a big case. It's been reopened multiple times. It's been some time now, so it doesn't surprise me. It took a minute to get all the way back around.
Let's talk about Oba Chandler.
What an interesting name.
Oba was born in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1946. He had 4 siblings. His father, Oba Sr., was Native American and born in a very isolated area of Kentucky. He worked in the coal fields and had a really hard-scrabble Appalachian life. He and his second wife, Margaret Johnson, finally left Kentucky for Ohio. Success always seemed to elude Oba Sr., who could only find work as a day laborer in Ohio. According to his family, he ruled the house with an iron fist, using a leather strap to beat his children into submission. One of Oba's 5 sisters, now this is Oba Jr., one of his 5 sisters will say their father didn't understand how to raise children, that he was not a very good dad. When Oba Jr. was only 10, his father committed suicide by hanging himself in the family's basement. Oba was said to be so distraught by his father's death that he threw himself on the open grave, though some of his family members have disputed this claim.
And said it didn't happen like that?
Yeah. But it obviously impacted him in a significant way, leading Oba Chandler down a dark path. By 14, he was engaging in petty theft. That progressed into Grand Theft Auto, stealing cars. Throughout his life, Oba Chandler was a criminal who faced charges for armed robbery, burglary, and even kidnapping. He had over 20 arrests as a juvenile.
Damn, that's a lengthy record for a juvenile, right? Or for anyone.
He dropped out of school. Despite little education, he was street smart and had an IQ of 120. By 1960, Oba was sent to Tampa to live with his married sister, Helen. His mom thought maybe she would be able to straighten him out. Maybe a change of environment.
Yeah, maybe she thought her sister's husband, her son-in-law,
Right.
could maybe be a male, a positive male influence on Oba.
It did no good, as Oba continued being a delinquent. He was sent back to Kentucky to live with his mother in 1961, but was arrested for stealing a car. At the age of 15, Oba discovered a talent for getting girls to have sex with him. That year, he began a relationship with another teenager, which resulted in the birth of 2 daughters. It began a pattern. Oba would attract women, then dismiss them for no reason. One relative will say he treated women like garbage. He eventually fathered 8 children.
Oh my gosh.
2 days after Christmas in 1965, the father of 3, who was now 19, enlisted in the Marine Corps. However, Parris Island didn't work out for him. He was in trouble for disobeying orders and using disrespectful language. He didn't want any part of the Vietnam War and eventually deserted his post. His first major crime came in 1967 when he robbed a wig shop,
Okay.
taking over 20 wigs worth around $1,300.
No, wait a second. I thought I instantly thought in my head, well, surely it was like the till or, took the money, but he took wigs.
He robbed the wigs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you take wigs or the money?
What do you think?
You would take wigs.
You know I love a good wig. After an armed robbery, he was given 10 years in prison, but managed to walk away. Like he just walked out the door of the damn prison.
Oh, like I thought he meant he got away, didn't get found guilty. He literally walked away.
No, he went to prison and then just walked out the front door. He used a series of fake IDs to work, but continued getting into minor trouble. Police had no idea they were arresting him. Or the police that were arresting him, they didn't have any idea of who he was because he's using fake IDs. But when they finally realized that he is Oba Chandler Jr., a wanted felon, they're like, what? Okay. In 1982, the Secret Service came calling as Oba had been counterfeiting money. In March of 1983, after his real identity was finally revealed, he was given 7 years in federal prison in Texas with another 5 years of on parole.
And if our listeners do not know, which I'm sure many are aware, the Secret Service's original mission was, hunting down counterfeiters and such. And later on were added to, presidential security detail added to their department.
But get this, Dylan. After he is given a 10-year sentence, he escapes. He's on the run for years. He's counterfeiting. He finally gets this 12-year sentence. He only serves a year in jail.
And they let him out.
He earned his GED and became a model prisoner, so they let him out.
This is the kind of stories about the system I just do not understand.
No.
I simply don't understand how someone who's already shown all these, antisocial behaviors, willingness to commit crimes and, escape and do whatever he wants. And you finally got him dead to rights, but you let him out after a year.
No, right? He's not going to get back out and reoffend.
Well, yeah, he certainly didn't learn his lesson because he's barely been in jail, I mean, damn.
Investigators learned that Chandler had married a woman named Deborah Whiteman on May 14th of 1988. 7 months later, the couple bought a house on Dalton Avenue, so they would become Joe and Steffi's neighbor. In February of 1989, the Chandlers welcomed a daughter. Oba Chandler did own a blue and white Bayliner boat in 1989, but sold it 3 months after the Rogers triple murders. Piecing together information, detectives learned that Chandler moved his family to Port Orange on Florida's East Coast during the summer of 1990. He was working as an unlicensed aluminum siding contractor at the time. Judy Blair was able to identify Oba Chandler from a photo lineup. Handwriting experts confirmed it was Oba Chandler who had written directions on Joe's brochure. Investigators began surveillance in September of 1992. On September 24th, law enforcement arrested Chandler on charges of sexual battery. A palm print located on the brochure also matched Chandler, furthering his connection to the murder victims. Of course, he immediately demands a lawyer. However, the state's attorney's office wanted more solid evidence before charging Chandler with the triple homicide. Investigators decided to turn to Oba Chandler's family. Chandler's adult daughter from a previous marriage, Crystal Mays, cooperated with law enforcement. She told detectives that her father had visited Cincinnati in 1989 and told her that he was wanted for murder in Florida. Crystal's husband had also witnessed the confession, stating Chandler had admitted to rape and murder. With this new information, the state felt a murder charge would stick. Investigators also were able to get phone records showing Chandler had called his wife on the days of the Judy Blair rape and the Rogers murders from the boat, stating that he was having engine trouble and would be late getting home.
Oh.
The calls confirmed he was out on the water at the time of the rape and murders.
Yeah. And also kind of seemingly making an excuse as to why he's not home already.
Chandler's trial began in the summer of 1994. In his testimony, he said that he had met the Rogers women as they sat in their car examining a map of the area. He gave them directions to the day's inn, but did not see them again after that, other than the news and on the billboards. He acknowledged that yes, he had been out on the boat the night of the murders, but insisted that he was alone. Engine trouble, he said, had been the reason for his calls to shore. He assumed it was a gas leak and called the Coast Guard and the Marine Patrol, but they were just too busy to help. In the end, he was able to repair his engine with duct tape.
Thank goodness.
And then head back to shore. Oh, the old, I couldn't commit murder because I was fixing something with duct tape excuses. Is it like every dad's excuse in the world?
I couldn't have done that. I was duct taping my fuel lines up.
That actually sounds like some bullshit excuse you would give me about something.
That I couldn't have done it because I was using duct tape?
Yeah?
Okay. Well, I don't know. That does sound like something I might say.
Yeah.
It doesn't really make sense, though.
Yeah, but, well, nothing you say makes sense. Okay?
Because just because you're using duct tape doesn't mean you can't do these other things.
Well, that's what I would point out to you.
No, and I know you would say that.
Yes.
And then
I
I would...
feel like this is a conversation that we may have had at some point in our marriage.
Okay. Maybe. I'm not going to say it's not a conversation we've never had.
Anyway, how many times have we heard that one? I can't commit the murder because I'm duct taping something.
It's the old I can't commit the murder because I'm duct taping something, theory for the defense.
Phone records show there were no calls made to the Coast Guard and that he was lying. A boat mechanic testified for the prosecution was able to sink, haha, pun intended, Chandler's explanation of the engine trouble and his repair.
Well, I was saying to myself, they can easily check Coast Guard logs and stuff because all that stuff's kept up with rather meticulously, I would guess.
It is.
And so, yeah, unless you did, which would have been smart for him to call the Coast Guard and ask for help and then say, hey, I'm good, actually. But, a lot of times I don't think these people think they're ever going to get caught. So they don't, cover their trail so good.
And then they have a mechanic who comes to the trial and says, like, yeah, there's no way that happened. And there's no way you fix it with duct tape. Judy Blair was called to testify, and her details matched greatly with those in the Rogers case. Tourists who were approached by a nice man and were then offered a boat ride. He had threatened to duct tape Judy's mouth, which the Rogers women were all duct taped, which left the question, like, why didn't he kill Judy? Some thought perhaps it was because her friend Barbara was a witness and could identify him.
Oh, okay. Well, that kind of makes sense. Or maybe he was working up to murder.
Crystal Mays also testified against her father, that he had come to Ohio and had made this confession. On November 4th of 1994, Oba Chandler was found guilty of the murders and sentenced to death. He maintains his innocence and has filed several appeals. Chandler was executed by lethal injection on November 15th, 2011 at Florida State Prison in Rayford. During 17 years of incarceration, Chandler received 0 visits. In the end, all he got was 2 salami sandwiches on white bread with mustard. He also asked for a peanut butter and grape sandwich on white bread, but he ate only half of it.
Well, I think he was the killer, don't you?
Well, yeah.
Well, yeah, fuck him. I'm glad he's dead. I mean, the only sad part of that is he spent that long on death row.
Joan, Michelle, and Christy were buried in Wilshire on June 13th, 1989 at Zion Lutheran Cemetery. The tiny farming community was in shock that something so horrible had happened to 3 of their own. Around 300 family members and friends came to pay their respects and comfort Hal Rogers. Hal poured himself into farming, eventually giving up on the cattle for pigs. He married a widow named Jolene, and the two were able to find solace in each other.
So sad.
Hal Rogers said, despite the execution of Oba Chandler, quote, "There's never going to be justice."
No, I mean, the hole in his heart and life. I mean, how do you feel it? No, you lost both your daughters and your wife.
I just want to give this man a hug. Pictures of him, interviews with him, this man carries so much sadness. It's heartbreaking. Detectives in South Florida announced that Chandler was linked by his DNA to the cold case killing of a 20-year-old Davie woman named Ivelisse Barrios Bugarisi, who was abducted in 1990.
So he was a serial killer. He was a predator.
Yup. Nearly 3 years after his execution, it was finally solved. The victim worked at Sawgrass Mills Mall, but didn't return home after a shift. Her car was found in the parking lot with slashed tires. She had been sexually assaulted, strangled, and had packaging tape stuck in her hair. Between May and September 1991, at the same time that the Tampa police investigated the Rogers family triple murder, Oba Chandler was an informant for the U.S. Customs Office in Tampa.
How does that? Does it say informing on what?
I'm not sure.
That's really weird.
Isn't it, though?
Yeah, so he was a sexual predator who I think graduated to murder. And, there's no telling how many victims he left in his wake, alive and dead.
And I had written down my resource for today, but I cannot find it. It is a book, I believe it is called Death Cruise. And I think the guy's name is Donald, but I'll have to look up.
No, me and you discussed, and I think now I have more.
Yes. Death Cruise by Donald A. Davis.
You got it.
I knew his name was Don, and I thought it was Death Cruise. But Don Davis, Death Cruise, was my primary resource for this case today. And then I read a lot of the news articles from the time period.
Now, me and you discussed this, and we were like, hey, certainly not victim blaming, but going on a boat with a stranger with your daughters is could be maybe not a good idea, right? But now, honestly, from hearing your whole story and backstory, I think I have more clarity as to maybe Joe's motivations on that, given everything that went on at home, all the sexual abuse and everything, and them just getting away, and they were doing all the things, all the fun things. For the girls, just to take their minds off of it. It seems that maybe just a good, solid boat ride was one of the last things missing to complete their trip. And they felt they had lucked up and met just, a kind stranger who could provide this, beautiful sunset boat cruise.
Well, right.
So that really makes more sense to me, having heard all the backstory and everything as to why they were in Florida. And again, it may give me pause, but if I was in that exact circumstance, I may take this kind stranger up on his offer of a sunset cruise.
Well, in our discussion as well, Dylan, I pointed out that these are women who, well, one, it's a different time period. I mean, this is the 80s.
It's true.
Right? And we were not inundated with we should be paranoid and be afraid of everybody back then.
Right.
News wasn't as globally connected as it. We're not as globally connected. So I pointed out that you've got this woman from a very small town where they feel very safe. They know everybody. They're farm people. They're probably just trustworthy.
Take people at their word.
They just trust.
Yeah.
And they take people at their word, and they don't see fear. And they're not thinking
they're not always looking for the boogeyman around the corner.
No, not at all.
That's a great point. And
they are probably also thinking, well, there's 3 of us and 1 of him.
Well, yeah.
Because I think of how many times I've been out with friends or whatever, and there may be like, oh, that guy's a creep, and my girlfriend will be like, oh, there's 3 or 4 of us, we can take him. Because you think, well, there's safety in numbers. So,
there you go.
well, he's not going to take out the 3 of us, right? So I mean, I think it's easy to see how they did end up in this situation.
Right. And again, I wasn't victim blaming.
Oh,
it's just
well,
a discussion.
no,
I want to make that clear in case that pissy woman has to pull off the side of the road and be like, I can't believe you said that woman shouldn't have did that. No, I'm just, it was a discussion me and Heather had.
No, we did have a discussion about like going,
right.
If you're being offered something, do you go? It's a stranger. Do you accept the invitation? Do you turn it down?
But all those points you made, I think is honestly have some bearing on why she would accept this invitation. And I don't know.
Well, and it's clear that, Joe and her girls were not the first to take him up on the offer.
Right. And he's amicable.
Blair,
he's friendly.
Friend, who knows how many.
He's charismatic, obviously.
He's offered a boat ride and then thrown them in the water, and they didn't surface.
Because he's obviously not creepy and giving women creeper vibes, or none of these women would go out on the boat with him. So here you have almost a unique creature in a serial killer, a predator, a sexual murderous predator who can put on a very good mask and seem rather normal. So that's scary in its own right.
He does. And I mean, here he is, married, has a baby. His wife at the time, seemed like a totally normal,
right,
regular, everyday woman.
There you go.
So she was convinced that he was a normal person.
Almost in the vein of BTK, a deacon, a respected member of a church and a family man. Everyone thinks he's just this great guy, but in reality, he was a monster.
Yeah, BTK is something else.
Dennis Rader's such a douche. He's such a freaking... That's how they called his punk ass. His own... Hubris and grandiose, attitude of himself and smarter and I'm better than everybody. And that's how they got his punk ass. And I'm glad they got his punk ass. All right, Heather. Well, thank you very much for that. And yeah, what else do we have for listeners before we get up out of here? And you go put me to bed. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I do appreciate everyone tuning in, and I hope that you appreciated today's episode.
Yeah, like I said, I'd heard all the tail end of that story, which was sad and horrible as it could be.
It's been covered by maybe a few podcasts. It might have been a Dateline or something.
I had no idea about the abuse and stuff in the beginning, so that really changes the dynamics of the story and like the reason for Joe and her daughters to be down there taking that trip. It really changes the dynamics, or just the whole kind of sheds a light on it for me. Thank you for that, as usual.
Okay, Dylan.
Oh my gosh.
We will be back with a midweek. This time it will be on its proper date, I promise.
We're going to do it. We're going to try it.
Not going to let Dylan delay or derail.
I'm making a midweek right now.
Are you making a midweek in your pants?
I'm making a midweek in my pants right now.
I think you spent too much time around toddlers this weekend.
Yeah, my 4-year-old granddaughter, she's something else.
Yes, she is.
All right. Until next time, same Mountain Murders channel and same Mountain Murders time. I got that backwards. Let's go.
Okay. Bye, Dylan.
Bye.